God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Our last speaker this morning is Chuck from Shreveport. I've never heard Chuck, but I do know that he's got a good AA program. Anybody that drive all the way from Shreveport to share his story with us is bound to have something worth hearing. So Chuck, come up here and tell us something.
Thank you, Troy. My name's Chuck, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing, one day at a time. I've been sober 10 years, 2 months, and 4 days today, and for that I'm grateful. I heard a fellow last night got up here with about 7 months sobriety and said something about if you don't give your sobriety date, you probably don't have one. I don't know about that one way or the other about somebody else, but the thing I don't want to say about that is in my particular case, on August 24th, 1974, when I made a sound decision that day to not drink, and that was the first day of my life that I had made a decision to not drink. I think that was a pretty important decision for me, and it was something that I couldn't make on my own, and it was obviously very important to me, and I like to remember that date. And I can also, by reflecting back on the last day that I had a drink, if nothing else, I can see some progress on any given day. I noticed last night, after Sherry talked and they had the round robin, I kind of zeroed in on what the real message was that everybody was getting, and it seemed like that everybody was the real message was talking about their inner feeling, how they felt before they got here, and how they feel now. And when I came here, I didn't want to tell anybody how I felt. You know, I didn't want to share any of my inner feelings, and I didn't understand that trying to, or having the ability to, share my inner feelings with another human being would be one of the things that would allow me to learn how to be sober and learn how to get outside of myself and see me as I really am. I have a copy of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the book that I own, and I don't want to talk about anybody else's, but the one that I own says that I'm to disclose in a general way what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And sometimes that's hard to do because you got to be a little bit more honest than you really want to be that day, maybe. When I was new, I had a sponsor, and he said, you need to talk about that. And I said, well, I don't want to talk about it. It was such a bunch of crap, I don't want to talk about it. And he said, well, you need to. And when I was growing up in California, I didn't relate with Sherry last night to the mule and the chewing tobacco. But I related to getting everything upside down all the time, and getting it all wrong. And I didn't relate to wanting everybody to see me so much, but I related to the thing that I wanted to feel different about me. I didn't know exactly what it was that I didn't like about me, but I just wanted to be different than I was. And, I think it's not typical of all alcoholics, but it's typical of some of us that we always wanted to be somewhere else. We always wanted to be doing something else. And the real bummer is we always wanted to be somebody else, and we didn't know what the hell we wanted to be, or we didn't know what we was the last time we were there. I don't recall early days of, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9, 10. I don't recall all of that. I know I wasn't born 12 years old, but I remember 12. And I remember that because my mother and I used to have all these real deep conversations. And I'd be sitting up watching TV, and I watch TV, 24 hours a day. When I can, then and now, I still watch it a lot. But she would say to me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I've always been that size I was. And I thought growing up, what the hell do I got to make a decision now for? She said, well, what do you want to be? And I said, well, I don't know what I want to be. She said, well, you got to be something. And back then I was watching a lot of them old movies, them old boys drinking that wine, riding them freight trains, getting into a new town and getting lucky on a few situations and then getting out of town before the heat got them. And I thought, well, I'd like to do that. And she said, well, them are hobos. And I said, well, then I'd like to do that. And she said, well, your present attitude, if you hang in there, you'll probably be a good one. My mother and I, that family life that I had before alcohol, I don't think made me alcoholic nor did it keep me from becoming alcoholic. But I think the environment that I grew up in affected the personality that I have, and as I look back on it today, as Norm Alfie says from California, if there's such a thing as an alcoholic personality, I got one. I'm not real sure what it is, other than you just ain't got it all going in the same direction very much of the time. My mother and I didn't get along. She had a problem with child abuse, and I had a brother, and she had that problem with one child, and I was always confused why it was with me. She told me that my brother was a winner, that everything that he did very well, and I didn't do anything. I never wanted to, play bass. I didn't ever want to do anything. If I did something, and after about 5 minutes of it, I had about all of it I wanted. I never did get real wrapped up in work. I wasn't interested in working. Wasn't interested in going to college. I wasn't interested in going to high school. I didn't want to do anything. My old man was a drunk. As I recall, back in those days, he was just a bum or a drunk, and he used to lay out all the time drunk and go to L.A. County Jail and all of the stuff that goes with, as we know today, some of the stages of alcoholism. When I was 14 years old, I had a lot of trouble around the house, and my mother and father decided that if I'd get out, everything would probably go a hell of a lot smoother, and I was sure that it would too. And I got me a job washing dishes in a coffee shop, and I think there's been 4 people in my life that was able to describe to me who I was, what I was, and how I felt. One of them before AA ever came into my life, and 3 since then. And the one that described it before, and I hadn't even had a drink yet, it was an old guy called Tommy, and he run this restaurant, and I washed dishes out there, and he told me one day, he said, "Come out front, I want to show you something." And I went out front, and there was an old boy named Cecil. And it was a little old Spanish town called La Puente, California, and that means the bridge. He told me, he said, "You see old Cecil there, he come by to wash the windows for a bottle of wine." He said, "I believe one day you'll be Cecil's replacement." And I hadn't even had a drink yet. And when I was 16 years old, I met a wino, and I was probably the first person in my life that I was impressed with. I never got impressed with anybody on television or any athlete or any of that. I wasn't, I just didn't make me any difference one way or the other. But this guy sat on the curb, and he drank Thunderbird wine, and he told me all these stories, all the places he had been, and all the things he had done, and everything he had seen, and how he felt, and all, everything. And man, them stories sounded pretty damn good. And I asked him why he drank that wine all the time. He said, well, the doctor told him it'd probably help him. I sat down there 3 or 4 days in a row with him, and one day he said, it'd probably even help you too. And I took a drink. And as I understand today, I found something then, that day, that was in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it says that men and women drink alcohol essentially for the effects induced by it. And I don't believe that had I not had some effect, I'd had any reason to take another drink. I know people say that they drank because they liked the taste. That's great, or they did this for that reason. Once I took that first drink and I had that effect, I knew I needed another one. I'm not like old man Rich from Louisiana who said between the first and second drink he crossed over into alcoholism. No, I worked at it a while. I was already sick enough. I had a lot of the isms of alcoholism, but I hadn't drank enough to have all of the feelings of the alcoholic who is suffering from the disease. I found out after a very short period of time that a lot of those stories that guy had told me in those places he had been there only in his mind. He had never left the curb that he was sitting on. I found that out early. I think I'm real fortunate as I look back on my life today, and when I do inventory work, that I started drinking wine at 16 years old, and I drank wine, and I did every type of drug that I could for 10 and a half years, and then I got here. And I got here at 26. So in a sense, I was fortunate. In 1964, I was in the L.A. County Jail, drunk in public, disturbing the peace, resisting arrest, and a few other little things. And I didn't know it then, but I was informed in 1979 by a guy named Norm Alfie that he had came to the L.A. County Jail and made a 12-step call on me and told me about Alcoholics Anonymous. 17 years old, and he told me that I should stop drinking. Now, prior to that point, I was 4'11" and weighed 85 pounds. I was definitely not a football star. I wasn't a real good-looking guy, and Sherry and I had a lot in common last night on that education deal. I wasn't too smart, and but that wine made me 6'2" and about 240. Good-looking, intelligent, and the thing that I always wanted to be is a real badass. A real tough guy. It made me that. And I'm 17 years old, and I'm in the L.A. County Jail, and I got an old man, 35 years old, that ain't got anywhere else to go but Alcoholics Anonymous, telling me I should quit. And it's the first thing that I ever found in my life up to that point that made me feel better about me. Now, I wasn't able to understand at 17 years old that alcohol was giving me the ability to escape the reality of my life. I couldn't see that. But as I look back on it, I needed to escape from something. And I needed to go somewhere, but I didn't know exactly where it was I needed to go. I got in trouble all the time drinking. And I understand, and Sherry and I talked about this last night. He said, I don't know if they'll be able to hear me back there in the back of the room. I said, Sherry, you and I don't have any problem with that. We're loud. We were loud before we got here, and me personally, I'm still loud now. I was loud drinking. When I took a drink, I had so much anger and hate and fear and other feelings on the inside of me, and it wasn't that I was so tough, it was I was so scared. And I was so angry at other people that I wanted to give out some of that pain. But, when you're 4'11" and 85 pounds and you jump on guys like Jerry over here, you don't give out a whole lot. You get a lot more in return than you give out. But that's what I always did when I got to drinking. I'd stand out in front of them old bars and behind them and in the alleys, and I'd decide that I was ready to hit somebody. And I'd pick up a club, and I'd look for some big dude, and I'd club him. And if he fell, then I'd start talking to him, about why he ought to leave me alone. And if he didn't, I'd haul ass. And I did a lot of running. I got to drinking so much that I couldn't swing the club just right. But I always wanted to dish out that thing, and it wasn't that I wanted to be tough, it was I was so scared of people, places, and things that people were seeing me as I really was. And when I was in San Francisco, I moved up there. I had an old drunk uncle lived up there, and he was a real religious fanatic, and he was a sign painter, and he was a drunk. And he invited me to come up to Frisco and stay, and he said, we'd get me all straightened out. Well, we went up there, and he said, we drank a few beers. I said, all right. So we drank a few beers. He said, well, tomorrow we're going out and paint a couple signs. All right. We went out and painted a couple signs, and I don't like work at all. I don't want to do nothing. So we painted a couple signs, and the next day he said, I believe we could drink a little beer and go to church tonight and just, we won't paint no signs today. I said, all right. Well, we stopped going to painting signs, and we stopped going to church, and we just laid around the house drinking all the time. Well, his wife, she got kind of fed up with that. She run both of us off, and that was in late 1964, and I had never seen him since, and I saw her a couple of times, and she had never seen him either, and I don't know what happened to him. When I was up in San Francisco, I had this, I want to say violent personality, but it really wasn't as violent as I would have liked to have believed that it was. In other words, I wasn't as tough as I thought I was back then. But I'd got to doing a lot of drinking, and I was smoking a little marijuana and taking a little prescribed medication, that I could get here and there, and doing a lot of drinking. And I got put in jail, and I recall in '64 Norm Alfie asking me if I'd ever had a blackout. Well, I don't know what that is. Now, I found out later what they were, but when I got put in jail up there in Frisco, and I was in the drunk tank a few days, and one of them public defenders that comes down there and acts like he cares, and you're not sure whether he does or not, came down there and he asked me if I knew why I was in jail. Well, I'd already been in jail 8 or 9 times at 17 years old for drunk in public, disturbing the peace, and grand theft auto, and a few other little old things. And I wasn't real sure, but I figured it was probably one of those, since that was my regular routine. And he said that I'd been arrested and charged with first-degree murder. And, I really wanted to hurt somebody, but I wasn't real wrapped up in killing anybody. And I didn't understand that I was killing myself at the same time. I stayed in there about a month, and this guy asked me, he said, would you plead guilty to manslaughter? And then I learned the thing that the alcoholic does that's in the later stages of alcoholism in my case. I would agree to and plead guilty to anything provided I could leave right now. Provided I could get out now, I would do it, because I knew that once I got outside of there, I could get a drink. I never ran out of money drinking because I stole. I said, when can I go? And he said, well, we'll go before the judge in the morning, and you'll be out by dinner. And we went before the judge the next morning, and the way I felt, is I didn't even ask who it was, what had happened, how, because I didn't care. I didn't know, and I didn't care. And I went before this judge, and he told me that I was a menace to society. And he told me that there's a program for guys like you, and it's called Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, I got your record from Los Angeles, and he said, you know, you're a real pain to society. And he said, you know, this thing at AA works. He said, some people have to take it to the depths of insanity or near death before they do anything. And he said, at 17 years old, you got such a smart mouth and a rotten attitude that you probably won't survive to the depths of insanity. You know, somebody's going to kill you out there. And he said, by all rights, he said, I'd like to lock you up this morning for the rest of your natural life, but I can't do it. And he said, how do you plead to manslaughter? And I said, I plead guilty. He said, you sure you did it? I said, man, I did it. And he said, I sentence you to not less than 5 years and not more than 10 years. Well, I'd been in a drunk tank in L.A., and I'd been informed already that my grandpa had died drunk there, and I'd been informed that my old man had been in there drunk in DTs and had to be taken out and put in the hospital. And I'd done that little old drunk tank deal, you know, and I'd been up to the 5th floor of the L.A. County Jail a time or two, and it wasn't any big deal. But I was going off to do this time, and it wasn't going to be in the L.A. County Jail, and it wasn't going to be in no drunk tank. And I realized then two things, that I was a little boy trying to survive in a big boy's world. And I learned then that if there was any hope for me ever on God's green earth, I'd have to learn to survive one day at a time. And later on, when I got sober, I found out that that thing that I learned back there helped me an awful lot. I learned to survive in there one day at a time, and I stayed 19 and a half months. My brother came from Los Angeles, put up $10,000 cash, guaranteed them I'd get out of the state of California and not return for 12 years, that I would check in with a probation officer for 12 years, that I would join the United States Army immediately upon release from jail. And I agreed to do all of that. They took me down to San Francisco to the Presidio there in handcuffs, and they said he'd like to join the Army, and I went off to be a soldier. I had a lot of problems already, but when I got in the Army, I met a big, fat, red-headed, freckle-faced, sissy-looking boy from Louisiana, and I'd never been to Louisiana that I had knew of. And he said, are you from California, boy? And I said, sure am. He said, well, there ain't but one kind of guy comes from California. And I had never had a date. I had never kissed a girl yet. I hadn't held hands with one. I had dreamed about it, thought about it, meditated about it, prayed about it, but I hadn't done any of it yet. But I sure wasn't no sister. I sure wasn't sweet on fellas. And I let him know I wasn't by picking up something and clubbing him. Well, I started off my military in jail, and I, for the next 4.5 years, I didn't go to basic training. I didn't go to any kind of job training deal. I just went from jail to jail and state to state in the Army and Europe and Asia and a few other places. And I think my alcoholism was really progressing at that time, but I was moving so often that I wasn't getting much heat on me. You know, I'd get into a new place and I'd stay there 3 or 4 months, and just getting to borrowing and stealing stealing cars and selling cars and doing this and doing that, and the heat would just about get ready to go and they'd move me out again. But I ended up in a town up in Missouri, Waynesville, Missouri, in a place called Fort Leonard Wood, and I was 4.5 years in the Army. I was a private E1. I'd never been promoted. I met a girl up there, and it was my first encounter with ladies other than professional ladies. This gal was a drunk about like me. She was about as big as I was. She had a mouth about as big as I did, loved to club people, you know. She was a real winner. And I met her in one of these old bars, you know, and we used to sitting up there drinking and having a big old time, dancing and acting a fool. And this guy, big guy, and old girl in this booth behind us, mine, got up to go to the bathroom and do her dirty deal, whatever she was going to do. And he said, man, that's a dog you with. And I said, yeah, I know it, man. Times are hard. Well, she come on back. She come on back, and we had a couple more drinks, and she got up and went and did her deal again. And he said, man, I'm not kidding you. That is a dog. I said, I know it, buddy, but I'm telling you, man, times are hard. So she come on back, and we had a couple more drinks, and his got up and went to do her deal. And I glanced over there, and I said, buddy, that's a real dog you with. And he said, well, that's my wife. And I said, well, you're a hell of a lot worse off than I am, man. Well, that old boy stood up for about 30 minutes. And I think I had a glimpse of sobriety during that period. And we went outside, and I'd been in the barroom brawls and had associated with a few motorcycle gangs and that kind of deal. Basically, I was a coward unless I was drunk or there was women standing around that could see me. Then I was very brave and foolish. But we were standing outside, he and I, discussing about the two ladies. and the girls from the bar came out, and he said, son, you really ought to go on about your business. And he said, just, go somewhere. And I was going to go. I had a car, I think, and I was going to go in the car if I had one, or I was going to run like hell. But them women was standing there, and they said, that little guy ain't scared of him. Well, he was about 6'4", 250 pounds. They said, that guy from California, he ain't worried about that guy. That guy ain't nothing. And I said, that's right, he ain't nothing. And, one thing led to another. And he finally had all he wanted of me, and he said, well, look, you either go or I'm going to kill you. And I said, well, son, you ought to either shoot or shut up. And he said, okay. And he pulled a gun out and he shot me. Well, I fell down and I got up and realized, it wasn't that big a deal. They just shot me across the heart, Hell, with a drink or two would be all right. So we went on back in and started drinking again, me and him and his old girlfriend and mine, and we all sat down in the same booth, and, it was a big old time. A couple of weeks later, I was drunk again up there, and I bought a car, and I often wonder about our welfare, with the military, because they financed me a car, a brand new Pontiac, with nothing down, no driver's license, no car insurance, and I was a private E1 for 4.5 years. Had 2 or 3 court martials and 5 or 6 of them Article 15 deals, and they financed me a brand new car. And I even borrowed some money to put gas in it. I didn't pay any payments on it. I had 3 or 4 months, didn't pay any payments, didn't buy any insurance, and didn't get no driver's license, because I didn't figure, the deal would work long, because I had never had any success with cars. That's why I never bought none. I usually just borrowed them or stole them. Anyway, we were drunk, me and this old gal, and one of us was driving, I don't know who, and hit somebody head on, and folks were seriously hurt. And the military decided that if I'd re-enlist for 6 years, they'd bail me out of the whole deal. They'd resolve the car problem, and they would get me out of town. Well, I said, when? And they said, now. We're talking now. Within the hour, you can be out of town, on your way. And I signed up for 6 more years and got $10,000 and signed the check, and they gave it to the people and made the restitution. And I got out of town, and when I was getting ready to leave, they said, now, where do you go from here? Seattle, Washington, and then you go to Vietnam. I'd always been kind of big on that barroom hero, sit up there at bar stool, looking in the mirror, telling everybody what a badass you was, a real war hero, a Green Beret, a real killer over there. But, it just made a lot more sense to talk about it than actually do it. And I wasn't real wrapped up in going over there, so I headed out of Missouri and was going to go on to Seattle, but I thought I might go down to Juarez for a while. So I went down to Juarez and stayed 5 or 6 months, and went out to Tijuana, and I stayed there 5 or 6 months, and went to California to visit my brother, who I know needed to see me in the condition I was in, and stayed there a while, and they came and got me and showed me how to get on an airplane, and took me to Seattle, Washington, and told me I'd be there about a month before I got to go, and first time they blinked an eye, I was gone, and I was back down around Mexico, and I stayed gone almost, 8 or 10 months. They came and got me, and they found me, and they took me back in handcuffs, and they took the handcuffs off of me when the airplane took off, non-stop Cameron Bay, Vietnam, so I ended up over there. If the plane would have stopped anywhere before then, I would have got off running. And I find today, as I do inventories about me, that it really had nothing to do with where I was going. I would have been running, whether I would have been going to Vietnam or L.A. or New York or Miami or anywhere else. The pattern of my life was that I could not deal with reality, that alcohol gave me the ability to escape reality to a point. And until I got into the later stages of alcoholism and there was no escape from reality, no matter what I drank or what I smoked or what I took, then I got into the real sick part of it. And I stayed over there a year. They gave me one job during that year, and it's the only thing they ever trusted me to do, and I blew the whole deal. I'd been there a little while, and they asked me, we had latrines out there, and they have a guy go down there and drag that stuff out in a little barrel, and pour a little diesel fuel in it and burn it, and when it got done burning, you slide the little barrels back into latrine deals. And I got out there, and first day I did it. I had a couple of drinks or something, but I went down there and did it. It wasn't no big deal. Anybody could burn that stuff. I had about 5 or 6 of them. I decided it smelled so bad and it was so hot over there that, I ought to prepare myself for the next day. So I volunteered the next day to go burn crap. And when I went down there, I took me a little liquor and took me a little beer, and took me a little marijuana to smoke, and took me a radio and some beads and a headband and a radio and a lawn chair. And I went down there and filled them things up with diesel and started burning that stuff. And I got to drinking, and listening to the radio, and I was smoking weed, and everybody was going by away, I was having a big old time out there on the corner burning crap. And And I got confused about whether the barrel was coming in or going out. And I just figured, shit, it'd just be a hell of a lot easier just shove them all in and forget about it. So I just shoved all the barrels in one pot, and I burned 6 outhouses down and 1 lieutenant that was sitting in there taking care of business. Burned him up, and they had to take him over and get him fixed up. And so they said I couldn't even burn crap, So they said, why don't you just do this? You still a private E1. You've been in the Army 5.5 years. You're probably not going to go anywhere in the Army. Why don't you just get up every day, and if you want to eat, go down there to chow hall and eat, and then go down to the EM club and get drunk. Just stay down there and come back and go to bed and get up and do it again tomorrow. And if you don't want to come in that night, that's all right too. Just don't worry about it. And so that's what I did for the rest of that year. I stayed drunk. Well, I laid out on the beach, and I got a real charge out of watching Vietnamese blow our stuff up at night, especially 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd be taking weed and horse tranquilizers and drinking beer and wine and whiskey, and they'd be blowing our stuff up, and they'd quit, and I'd just, God, go one more time, Let me see all them lights. And they'd blow it up, and I had a real big time. And my year was up, and they said, would you like to go home? And I thought about it. Well, I was 20 years old, and it was the first time in my life I hadn't been to jail in a year. First time I hadn't got shot at, that I knew of. Might have got shot at over there, I don't know. First time I hadn't been beat up. I hadn't run out of nothing. I hadn't had to steal anything. Wasn't nobody looking to hurt me, And wasn't anybody that wanted to hurt me from over here going to come over there. Hell, that was a good deal. And I said, man, I ain't about to go home. Sign me up another year. And I signed up for another year, and they transferred me. And they give me a guy that I often think about when I'm at meetings, and sometimes when I'm at home and I'm in my little quiet time thing. I think about this guy. He was a black guy, and he was a Sergeant E7, and he'd been over there for 4.5 years. He'd never come home. And he'd gotten real bad into a drug problem, and he was into survival at that time, and just learning to survive over there. Coming back here was not even a figment of his imagination. He was only concerned about surviving one more trip out over there. And he and I got teamed up on a gun jeep, and he told me, son, he said, the only way that I know that you're going to get to go home is if you do what I tell you. And if you don't do what I tell you, you're not going to make it. And I said, well, what do I do? And he said, well, you drink just enough, you cut it off as quick as you can. You drink enough that you can survive, and you drive this gun jeep, and you drive that son of a gun as fast as it'll go. And when I tell you to stop it, you stop it. You do everything I tell you to do. And I don't care if you drink, but I don't want to hear nothing about me shooting my drugs up. And I said, all right. He and I rode together for a year in that jeep, and we ran a gun jeep and led convoys over there. And when they told me about insanity in 1964 when Norm Alfie came to the L.A. County Jail and talked to me in the drunk tank. He told me about the insanity, never related to it. Off and on during those years in penitentiaries and institutions and new towns and military bases, I was sent to treatment centers and hospitals and AA groups and a number of things, but I never related to it. And that morning, as that lieutenant said to me, when they fired the convoy, you go back and get them to shoot at you. I said, man, I heard about that. That's called insanity. They talk about it now, Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not going back for nobody, brother. If they don't get through, I'm sorry about it. I don't care about nobody but me. Well, that guy that was in charge of that jeep, he explained to me how it works, and so we did go back on a regular basis and did it the way he said. And I think this is the only time in my life that I ever, before coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, felt that I had been any kind of done anything okay. I heard people in the meeting say they were perfectionists. Man, it had to be number one. I don't remember being that way. I don't remember having any of those feelings today. I remember if there's 5 guys running a race and I came in 5th, man, that was competitive, because I never finished anything. And I think when I came back from over there, I felt like something was going to be different. I think a year before that, I felt like something's going to be different, but I never knew what it was that was going to be different. I came back from over there in 1971. I've been there 2 years. 5.5 years I remained a private E1 in the Army. When I came back, I was a Sergeant E6. I've been promoted 6 times in 6 months. I had some little medals that said I was something different. I was supposed to go to Washington, D.C. and get a promotion and a medal up there. I got shot the night before I came home. I got off the airplane, and the only thing that's important about that is something said that I'm going to be different now. Well, when I got off that plane and I took a drink, there wasn't anything different. It was the same the way I drank in California or the way I drank in Vietnam or Florida or New York or Detroit or anywhere else, the effects were always the same. I drank as a result of the insanity of my illness, of alcoholism. I came back and they told me I was going to Georgia. I put in for California and I got Georgia, and I told them I wasn't going to Georgia. I saved all my money while I was over there. My brother in California had quit high school and became a very wealthy and successful businessman. By then was nearly a millionaire in his profession. My brother told me that he had bought me a brand new car for a coming home present from over there. My sister-in-law had bought me a brand new wardrobe of clothes. My brother had started a savings account for me, and I had all of this money, and I was supposed to go to Georgia. And I was 21 years old, and I had a brand spanking new car, and I had about $15,000 in my pocket, and I was looking so good. And I thought, you know, hell, you ought to go back to Juarez one more time. I went down to Juarez, and while I was down there, I bought some guns, and I don't fool with guns today. If I got a choice, I don't even touch one. Guns and alcohol, for me, are a losing situation. I get to drinking, and I get the gun, and I wave it around, and one or two things always happen. I use it on somebody else, or somebody else makes me try to eat that damn thing, and it's just too hard. It's too hard to try to eat them. I don't fool with them, but I had came back, and I'd bought these guns or something down there, and I came through Louisiana, way out there on old Highway 80 in that brand new car, and I used to fool with race cars a little bit a few years back, and I thought I had one there, and state police clocked me in excess of 135 miles an hour and took me to jail, to the Benton jail, and posted $488 bond and got the hell out of town. You know, I wanted to go to Georgia, but I didn't want to go to Georgia. I went on to Michigan, you know, by way, you know, I was going to Georgia, but I needed to go to Michigan. I'd never been there before, but I really needed to go. I went on up to Michigan and laid out drunk for a while, and then I went to New York, and I went to Memphis, and I went to Kentucky, and I went to some little old town right outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and stayed up there drunk a while. My brother's wife had some great uncle back there that was a big-time drunk, and I went to check him out. He and I laid up drunk for a while, and I went through Savannah, Georgia, but I still had money, so there wasn't no sense stopping at the Army base, and I went on to Florida, and I stayed down Florida damn near a year drunk. And when I signed into the Army base, it was because I'd sold my car for a bottle of wine, and I'd run out of money, and my stealing deal was getting bad then. I was getting caught more than I was getting away with anything, and I checked into the Army base and asked them, did I have any money coming, and they said no. And they gave me a job. They wanted me to go out and pick up pine cones. And I told them I was a damn Vietnam veteran. I was a war hero, and they said, you look like one in your cut-off jeans, your sweatshirt, your headband, and your beads, and your earphones on. You look like some kind of something. And I said, well, I'm not picking up pine cones, and they said, well, you're going down the motor pool and work. I said, no, I'm not doing that either. I'm not doing nothing. I'm not even coming back. I'm leaving. And I did. I left and went downtown and got me a job working in a bar. The guy said, you can eat all the hard-boiled eggs you want, all the chili you want, and drink all the beer and smoke all the cigarettes you can handle, but I ain't giving you no money, you know. And I'm going to come in a couple times a night and check the cash. And you can sleep in that old trailer house out back. And I laid up in there for, I don't know, 6-7 months, drunk, eating them chili and hard-boiled eggs every day, morning, noon, and night, and smoking them old cigarettes. And one day these MPs come down there and they picked me up at the bar, and they carried me out to the Army base, and I stood before a lieutenant colonel in the Army, and I had on my sweatshirt and my cut-off jeans and my beads and my earphones, and I hadn't had a haircut in nearly 3 years and hadn't shaved either. Hadn't had a bath real regular either, long about that time. And he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. It was nothing. And he said, you know, I think I'm going to kick you out of the Army. And I said, I think that'd be a hell of a good deal. And I got, in 1971, I got a dishonorable discharge from the Army after 6.5 years service, active service, and about 2 years AWOL time. I was a Sergeant E6 that day. I got busted to a Private E1. I got a dishonorable and got kicked out. They asked me, did I want to go to Washington for that little deal up there, and I really did, for my ego. But I knew I had 5 felony warrants out for my arrest in Washington, D.C. I wasn't about to go up there for no damn medal. I knew I was going to jail if I did. When I got kicked out of the Army, my alcoholism, I think I was nearing the bottom, because it was the first time that in all of my life, in and around the meetings, that I began to feel bad about what I was doing. Up to that time, about 3 people had died, directly or indirectly, with my drinking and my behavior. And my thing on that was, hey, that's the breaks. You know, everybody has a bad day. Whatever. I was beginning to feel bad about who I was and what I was. I went to California when I got kicked out, and I had a brother, and I know that there's other people in the program that are in similar situations. I had somebody that loved me so much that tried to buy me everything that society would deem me a successful human being. I came home to California, and my brother bought me an art gallery, and I couldn't even spell art then, let alone know what it was. And he bought me an art gallery, and he went down and bought me a brand new Corvette, and he set me up in his high-rolling apartment complex, and he had his wife go out and set me up with clothes again, and did everything for me. And on Monday morning, they took me down to my art gallery, and I opened it up, and I looked at that, and I said, "You mean to tell me people are buying this crap?" He said, "Yeah, man, they're selling like hotcakes." I said, "Hell of a deal." I said, "What do I do?" He said, "Well," he said, "you just sit there in that three-piece suit at that desk and look in the mirror and tell yourself how good you're doing." He said, "Don't drink, that's all you got to do, don't drink." He said, "If the phone rings, you answer it and tell them to hold on and get somebody that knows something. That's all you got to do." I said, "How much am I going to make?" He said, "Hey, you might make $500 this week, you might make $2,000 this week. I don't know. Just depends how it goes." Well, I got to making a lot of money. And I said, "What do I do with money you put in your pocket? What does a drunk do with $2,000 in his pocket? He takes a drink." But I'd sit there, and besides alcohol and guns and women and pills and other drugs, my next problem was seeing me in a mirror. And I'd sit there and look in that mirror, I had my feet propped up on that desk, and I'd be smoking them big old cigars. God, you look so good in that three-piece suit, and you got that diamond ring on, and you always wanted 6 women. Now you could do it, brother. You got $2,000 in your pocket, you got a new car, you got a business, you got that secretary out there's crazy about you, seeing you puking and crapping on yourself. But now that you're sober, you're saying, boy, she's really crazy about you. And God, you could do so good if you had you about 5 or 6 girlfriends right about now, and go down there and get you one of them drinks, one of them sissy drinks. They stir around, got that stuff floating in it, and they suck on it for a half hour, finish half of it, and go back to work. That's what you do. Well, I didn't know it then either. 4 doors down, there was a guy named Norm Alfie that had a business right by me, the same guy that called on me in the L.A. County Jail in 1964. I went down there to get one of them drinks, and I don't really know exactly. There was a joint on the corner, but I don't remember if it was there or somewhere else that I got that drink. But I got me a drink, and I was gone about a month or 2. Could have been 3, I don't know. I came back, and my brother asked me questions that I have never, since I've been a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, asked anybody coming in. It's ridiculous. Because you already know. He would say, "Where's your car?" How in the hell do I know where my car is? I was like, if I knew, I wouldn't be walking, Well, where'd you get them clothes? This is not what I had on when I left. No, you had on a suit. Well, I don't know where I got them blue jeans. What have you been doing? The police been down here looking for you. For me? Not me. I don't know exactly what I did during that time. Sometimes I'm grateful that I don't know. That I don't know everything. I went to my brother's house. My brother had 3 little girls, 12, 11, and 6, I think. I went there and I did whatever I do when I'm drinking to them. He had a lovely wife that I've known forever, that I went to school with, and I did whatever to her that I do to women and against women when I'm drinking. I find out sober that I had so much trouble with women because of how I felt about my mother and the way that she used to abuse me as a child. I went to business associates of my brother's and did things that I do when I'm drinking. My brother asked me that day, and it's the only time that my brother ever asked me to do anything. He never asked me for nothing. He never expected nothing out of me. He never wanted anything that I had. He just wanted to love me, and he just wanted to see me be okay with me. And he said, this is probably going to be the only time in my life that I ever ask you for anything. And he said, what I'd like you to do today is get the hell out of my life. I don't know why you didn't die while you were over there in Vietnam, because there might have been a reason for it. I know you're going to die from alcoholism, and there ain't anything I can do about it. But I think that we're at a point now that my kids and my wife don't have to pay for your illness anymore. and my business associates don't have to pay. And the things that you steal from the shops that I own, I want you to get the hell out, and I don't want you to come back, and I don't ever want to see you, and I don't want to ever hear from you again. I bought you everything that society would deem you a successful human being, and you're a bum and a loser. And my brother put me on a freight train with a bottle of wine, and I rode that train I don't know for how long. I know in 1973 I was in jail, in the Benton jail in Benton, Louisiana. I know that I got off that freight train in Lake Charles, but I don't know exactly what happened between then and the time that I got to jail. I know I was in Louisiana in 73, but prior to that I don't know. There was about 10 months there that I'm not sure what happened. In the beginning they said, do you know about blackouts? And I said, no, I don't. Then I came into AA with my smart-ass attitude, and they said, do you know about blackouts? And I said, they might be blackouts for you, buddy, but they're vacations for me. There ain't no any vacations in this illness of alcoholism. 1973, I was in the Benton jail for drunk in public, disturbing the peace, resisting arrest, grand theft auto. And there was a man over there that was a very religious man, and he was the head sheriff and the jailer and everything, and his name was Willie Wagner. And Willie Wagner came to me and he said, I ran a make on you, buddy. You've been in jail over 153 times. I said, I know it. He said, you got a dishonorable discharge, and there's 5 felony warrants for your arrest in Washington, D.C. for attempted murder and interstate flight to avoid prosecution and several other things. And he said, I don't know exactly what it is I see in you, but I see something today. I don't believe that you belong here. You're not like everybody else. And I'm going to take you out of here today. And he took me out and he dropped me off downtown Bossier City in front of a bar. And he said, I hope that when you get out of this car that you'll find Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. And I'm not laughing or criticizing or joking because, in a sense, he knew what I needed. He just couldn't give me the right direction to get there. He didn't know what road for me to take. But he led me out in front of my place. Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves was the name of that joint. And he gave me $5 and he said, go find Jesus, son, and I hope you make it. And I got drunk, and the next morning I was sitting out there when he got to work, and they had me for grand theft auto, drunk driving, disturbing peace, resisting arrest, bodily injury involved. He let me out a couple of days and he said, I'm going to let you go. And he did. A couple of days I was back and they had me for stealing the sheriff's car then. And he told me that I was going to do every bit of my time out there before I ever got back on the city streets again, and I did. And when I got out of there, Willie told me, he said, I hope that you find whatever it is that you need, but something tells me that you're looking in all the wrong places. In 1973, I crawled back to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had been to Alcoholics Anonymous off and on for 10 years, and I related to a guy that I talked with yesterday that was walking around out here. I believe his name was Art. In and around 10 and a half years, and he'd only put together 27 days. It's the most sobriety he'd ever had. I've been in and around AA all over the country, and I know some of the people that helped write the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've spent time with them. I know some of the greatest AA speakers in the country, but it didn't do anything for me because I wasn't in there, I was like Johnny Harris used to talk about in California. He said, I'm the little guy standing outside the candy store looking in, but I just don't know how to get in. I'd been around, but I just couldn't get it, and I was around 10 and a half years, and I stopped drinking for 28 days, and I felt like I was the oldest, active, most successful member of the program. I didn't know anything, but I felt like, boy, I was going to really make it. And I met a little old gal in an AA meeting one night and fell in love and got drunk. I came back in a few months later and met a little old gal in an AA meeting, got drunk, fell in love, and went back out again. When I went back out the last time, I went back out because I couldn't do it on my own. I couldn't come in here and stay sober alone. But I wasn't to the point that I was willing to say, somebody help me. Somebody help the great Chuck W. from California. The guy that thinks he's so wonderful, he wants everybody to think, boy, I'm wonderful. But he doesn't like himself. And he can't stand what he is. But he doesn't want anybody else to know that. He wants everybody to know he's tough because he's got it together, And he's loud so nobody will know that he's scared. I went back out and I stayed 5.5 months. I drank Boone's Farm apple wine and took horse tranquilizers for 5.5 months. On August 23rd of 1974, I was sitting at a place called Walker's Alma Plaza on Greenwood Road. I had on my best clothes, my red and yellow and black and gray and white striped breeches and my blue see-through shirt and a shoestring holding it shut, old blue double-breasted coat. I was sitting out there drinking a bottle of wine. I was trying to get me a date with one of them little old girls swimming around in the pool. That I was probably old enough to be their daddy, but I was still trying. And a gal from Alcoholics Anonymous came by, and her name was Mary, and she'd been sober about 8 or 9 years at that time, I think. And she said, "How you doing today?" And I said, "I'm okay." There was a guy there that was suffering too. He was having a hard time in a room, and I went up there to see him, and I said, "God, he looks bad, Mary." And she said, "Does he really look that bad?" And I said, "He's dead. How bad can you look when you're dead?" And she said, "Why don't you turn around and look in the mirror?" And I turned around and I looked in the mirror, and I think, in my case, and I don't know about anybody else, but I think that God, for me, will show me exactly what I need when I'm ready. And I saw me that day, and I saw my brother and my sister-in-law and the 3 little girls and the other people that I've kicked and abused all my life. I seen the jails and the penitentiaries and the institutions and the judges that told me I should be locked up for the rest of my life, and then they gave me a break one more time. I saw that I was a guy that said all my life people have been kicking me in the teeth while I was in the gutter, and most of them been reaching down with a hand to help me get out. And I told Mary, "Would you take me to an AA meeting?" And she said no. You know, when I came in, everybody came around me with 25 and 30 years of sobriety, and guys that helped write the big book, and they said, "Man, this guy's going to make it." You know, I was the youngest one around in AA at that time where I lived, and everybody was right there doing for me what I could not do for myself. They were trying to sell me on something I didn't want and something I didn't believe. You see, because I was trying to make sobriety around me, and I didn't understand that sobriety was an inside job, that I had to learn how to be sober on the inside, that it wasn't association, that I didn't get sober and stay sober by associating with the oldest members in the program necessarily. Mary told me that day, "If you want AA, big boy, get up and go get it." I went to a meeting that night, and I asked the guy after the meeting that I didn't like, and I find out today why I asked a guy something that I don't like. I don't like him because he knows. I don't like him because he knows the answer, and I got to ask him if I want to know. And I asked this guy after the meeting, real smart ass, been sober about 10 years, you know, old timer. I said, "Bob, do you think it's possible I might get sober?" He said, "Get sober? Yes. Stay sober? Nope. No way." "Rich, what do you think?" That boy can't make 90 minutes, man, let alone 90 days. You know, he ought to go to an AA meeting and live there, you know, never leave. No, that boy will never make it in this program. And then a guy came up to me and he said, "Son," he said, "I've been going to Alcoholics Anonymous for 27 years. And he said, almost at every meeting that I hear somebody, either at the podium, around the coffee pot, around one of the tables, in or outside the meeting place, say, 'Expect a miracle.'" And he said, "I went for a long time expecting a miracle." And he said, "Do you know, I went enough days in a row to AA, and that one day the miracle was mine. That day, the miracle that was going to take place in that meeting was for me, and it was from God. And if you go enough days in a row, who knows? You know, now it may take you a lot longer than me, or it may not take as much time. But there will come a time that the miracle of sobriety will be yours that day, provided you're willing to reach out for it, provided you're willing to ask somebody to help you. As I understand it today, the only thing that I might do in my life all alone is die. And the only thing that I can't do all alone is stay sober and be a member of AA. I started out on the 12 steps. I didn't breeze through them. Most people say they did them the first week or month. Not me. I intended to work one a year, you know. Working was not my deal, you know. I hated work. I looked at the first step, and it said that we admit that we're powerless over alcohol and that our lives have been unmanageable. I was 26 years old, and I would allow a 62-cent fifth of Boone's Farm apple wine do with me whatever it chose to do. I would allow it to take me anywhere. I was at that point that if I was in a corner and the only way to have a drink was to kill somebody, I would do it if there was no other way out. I was powerless over alcohol, sure was. My life was unmanageable. Everything that I owned, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and materially, I could have put in an eyedropper if I'd had one. Yeah, my life was damn sure unmanageable. Came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Restore me to what? What the hell is sanity? I ain't never been there. You know, I've been the way I've been all my life. You know, I never did what other kids did. I never colored in coloring books when I was a little kid. I never watched cartoons. You know, I woke up dreaming, man. Norm in 1974 talked about going down that freeway in California in that fantasy land, man, dreaming. I've been dreaming forever. I don't know what restored sanity is. If I got to have what I had before I got here, God, let me pass on that step. Give me something new. I was so simple and so sick and so sorry and so lazy, you know, that instead of asking somebody in AA about this or going to a study group, I got out a dictionary. And I looked up the word sanity. And I found something that I didn't know a whole lot about, but I thought that might be possible. And it said that sanity was sound thinking and good judgment. I felt like maybe, you know, I could do that for one day. But I wasn't going to rush it. I was going to try it for about an hour at a time. I looked at the next step, and I understand step 3 very well today. Now, I can't say that I'm able to use it with perfection, because I'm not. But boy, do I understand it very well today compared to how it was when I got here. When I looked at that, and it said, came to believe, you know, no, I can't do that. That a power that made a decision to turn our will and lives over to the care of God as we understood it. My mother used to send me to church in California, and I got that little suit from the Goodwill, and I'd walk out of that little valley, up that little hill, a little white church up there, and they'd say, love your mama and love your daddy and be grateful for what you got and don't sin, you know. And I was thinking right then about a drink, you know, and girls and smoking them cigars and smoking everything, you know, sitting right there on the front row. And then I'd go back and, you know, my mother'd have her problem and my daddy'd have his. And I thought about that. And then one of my sponsors said that this is a spiritual thing. It has nothing to do with religion. Your God doesn't have anything to do with the God of my understanding. You've got to find one of your own. I think that step today, as I understand it, first I make that decision. I got to make a decision that I'm going to do this. And then I turn my will over to the care of God as I understand Him. In my case, my will being my thinking. And then I turn my life over to Him as I understand Him being my action and my behavior. And I did that real regular, and I took it back. That's why I had to do it real regular. First few years I was sober, I got real confused about this thing. You know, I was not drinking, and I was talking at all the AA meetings every time I got a chance to run my mouth. You know, I volunteered for everywhere. I sent my name out, you know. I was given the cure. Henry said what I was doing back in them days was giving progress reports, and progress was coming real slow. I got real confused about sobriety. I got this thinking that, boy, sobriety's opening up all these new doors for me. Man, I'm working down here. This guy's paying me $88 a week, and I'm working 5.5 days a week for that $88. Well, you know, that guy's stealing from me. Hell, I'm worth a lot more than that. So I'll just steal from him. What the hell? I've been sober a year. I know how to steal now. Well, I steal from the guy I worked for the first year. And then I got to thinking, you know, boy, you look so good now. You got your hair cut all the time, and you got that old beard on your face, and you got them $5 slacks you bought down there at Walmart, and them shirts you got over at the Goodwill, you know, and them shoes you got down at the shoe repair store. And God, you looking so good and doing so good. You know, all them little old girls out treatment center crazy about you. Ain't no reason just because you're married why you couldn't take out one or two, you know. Tell them about sobriety. Tell them about how Alcoholics Anonymous works, you know. And so I got taken out little old girls from treatment centers my first year. And I was having a big old time, you know. The only thing that positive that happened about any of that was nobody got drunk over it. You know, I got real sick behind it, but nobody got drunk over it. I found out through experience, and it's like I did everything wrong that first year, except maybe 2 things. I kept going to meetings every day. I made about 450 meetings my first year, and I kept asking God to help me. That's the only 2 things that I might have done right. Everything else that I did pertaining to recovering from this illness, I did ass backwards. But it was the first time in my life that, hell, you know, I felt important somewhere. I'd go to an AA meeting, somebody'd hug me, you know, glad to see me. I'd go to a meeting out there, one of them old girls would come up and hug me. Boy, you old good-looking devil, sure good to see you. You really got this AA working. Sure do, baby. You want to go out tonight? I got real bad with it. You know, and the message there for anybody that's new or been around a while having a little trouble like I did in some of them areas, Because you screw up doesn't mean that you have to return to drinking. But if you're screwing up in some of them areas and you want sobriety, then you're going to have to stop all that because you're not going to find it. I was sober 4 years in this program, and I cleaned up a lot of those areas. I stopped stealing from the guys that I worked for. I went to the guy that I worked for, and I wanted to make amends to him about this stealing. And I said, Milton, I'd like to talk to you this morning. He said, all right. He said, but I've already seen progress, if that's what you want to talk about. And I said, what do you mean, progress? He said, I can tell you done cut the stealing out, you know. things are a lot better. And I said, well, I said, things are good, huh? He said, yeah. I said, well, I'm real glad. I need to get on down the road here, partner. You know, I wanted to make them amends, but I didn't know if I was willing to make restitution. And that night, when I got ready to leave from work, he said, doesn't restitution come along with making amends? And this guy ain't alcoholic, and as far as I know, he had never been to an AA meeting, but somebody's been talking to him, I tell you that. And I said, well, it damn sure does, Milt. I was going to talk to you about that in the morning. He said, well, we can talk about it today. You know, there ain't no sense doing tomorrow what we can do right now. And he said, I think that you ought to work one Saturday a month free. One Saturday for the whole month free. And we ought to add up how much money you make for this company, and we ought to see if restitution has been made. And I said, well, I'll do that, and I did. And I've got this problem of chasing the little girls in treatment centers all worked out. I stopped doing that. And I found out then that sick people attract sick people. I found out by working some more of the steps that when I went out to that treatment center and them little girls said, oh, he's so cute, ain't he doing good, that sick people attract sick people, that I really wasn't that cute, and I really wasn't doing that good, and I really didn't have AA working all of that great, and so I stopped all of that stuff. And I found out then when I started associating with some different people. And I'm not saying people with X number of years of sobriety, because as I see winners today in this program, they're people who have the ability to practice the principles in their daily affairs on a one day at a time deal. And so I started associating with some other people. And I found out by associating with winners, they attract winners. In the sense that then I will be willing to change me. You know, if you're running around with a couple of old guys that's been married a few years and they're doing right and going to AA meetings, they're not going to go for you picking up a little old girl at treatment center, taking her out town to a meeting with you, you know, that kind of thing. You know, I began to straighten all that up, and I began to be more honest with me, and I saw the reality of my life, and that was that, as the big book says, there will come a time in my life that my sobriety is contingent upon my spiritual condition. And I want to tell you that I don't know when it's going to come for anybody, but in my mind I knew one day it's going to come. One day it's going to be there. And I think I'm going to start right now doing this deal like a finance company. I'm going to pay some interest now, man, because I know me, how screwed up when it comes, man, I'm going to need it. It ain't going to be like what they say, we crossed over that invisible line from social drinking to alcoholic. It's going to be a big deal when it happens to me, because everything in my life has been. And in 1979, it started. In 1979, I'd been married to a gal that was sober a couple of years longer than me and still sober in Alcoholics Anonymous and doing wonderful without me. But we had been married a few years, and we split up, and right after we split up, I'd taken on sponsoring a guy that worked out at this company that I did, which at that time was the biggest company in Shreveport. And he went out on the job, and he broke my anonymity to this guy that I was working for. And that guy said, you mean to tell me that guy has been in the penitentiary? He said, not once, but 3 times. And he said, and a dishonorable discharge? Sure has. And no high school diploma? You know, we don't hire people like that. Somebody hired his ass. And they called me in, and they told me they didn't need me. And I've been there about 2 years. And they said they didn't need me anymore. And about that time, I'd gotten sick and was put in the hospital, and I was suffering from pneumonia and malnutrition and a few other little sickly things. And my brother came from California to see me. I had saw my brother twice during that 4-year stretch of sobriety. My brother came when I was sober 3 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. He came to the Highland Club, and he was there for my 3-year birthday. My brother, I think if there was any other human being on God's green earth that I wanted to be just like. I wanted to be just like him. He was a little bit smaller than me, and he had red hair. The guy could take a truckload of pink rocks, and make $1 million. He just, everything he touched just turned to gold. And everybody loved him, and everybody liked him, and everybody respected him. And he was a guy that I thought felt real good about who I am and what I am and where I'm going in my life. It's amazing that God will let me see things the way He does, and the lessons that I pay for this. I spent so long thinking, God, if I could be anything, I want to be just like my brother. He's everything I ever thought I'd like to be. I didn't know that my brother, growing up and not drinking, had the feelings about our parents that he did in the little ghetto environment that we lived in. I didn't know that he didn't understand about relationships with women, and he didn't understand a lot of other things. Well, he came in January of that year of '79, and when he got there, I didn't know who he was. I almost didn't even recognize him. And he showed up, and he spent about a month there, and he went home. And on the way to the airport, he said, "Could you buy me a gun?" And I said, I don't know. He said, "Well, out there where I'm living, we're having a lot of burglars, a lot of prowlers. And out there where he lives, you got to have a card to get in the gate. It's a real one of them big dollar deals out there. I have hell getting in there every time I would go out there to see him." I said, I can't do that. I put him on an airplane, and as we were standing there waiting for the plane to start boarding, he said, I feel like the last year that you drank in the state of California, I spent $30,000 on your drinking. And I feel like that I bought you everything that society would deem you a successful human being. And today we stand here in this airport, and you're making $125 a week on your job, and you're 4 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and you're somewhat more honest than you used to be. And today I see that you have everything that society would deem you a successful human being. Mainly you have the ability to love and to care about other people, and the willingness to share yourself and what you have with them. He said, I think that you have that everything that society would deem you successful. He said, if I could buy it right now for the $30,000 I spent on you, I'd like to buy it and take it home. But I don't guess I can, and I'll see you later. And he left. And about 10 days later, his mother-in-law called me and said that he had committed suicide. I was sober 4.5 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had just learned to understand what this God of my understanding was all about. And I tried to put it together. I was going to go out there. What do you do when the only person that you ever wanted to be like dies, and you find out that they died because they were just like you? They were just like you. They had all of the feelings from alcoholism and drug addiction and all of the hate and the guilt and the remorse and the frustration, all the problems of the addictive personality, and you find out all along you were just like them. And they were just like you, that you were one and the same. I was going to go, and I didn't know what to do. What do you do when you go bury somebody? I'd never told another human being on God's green earth that I liked them, let alone loved them. I got married in 1974 and never told the girl I even loved her. I just, you're real neat, I got on that airplane that night, but I did the thing that I learned a long time ago in a penitentiary. I learned to survive on a 24-hour basis. I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous that night. I left and I went to the airport, and I locked my car and got on the airplane, and I went to California. Going back in the airplane, and I looked down, and here's my old man from Monroe, Louisiana, drunk, going to the funeral. I sat down and I talked with him a little while, and I'm trying to tell him, man, you don't have to be drunk if you don't want to be drunk. And I'm trying to tell myself, God works through people. This God of yours, this is going to be okay. You don't have to know why somebody had to die. You just have to know that it's going to be okay. The airplane stopped in Dallas, Texas. We had about an hour layover, and I took that survival thing with me, and I called Alcoholics Anonymous in Dallas, Texas. See, I think once I let the problem get too big, then it might be too late. That for me as an alcoholic, if I'm hurting, then I'm going to do something about it right now. I'm not carrying that hurt and pain around an hour. I'm going to call somebody from AA and say, I hurt like hell. I don't know how to feel. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. I don't know what, I don't know. And I called AA in California, in Santa Ana, California, which was where I was going, and I told the lady on the phone, I said, I'm an alcoholic, I'm from Shreveport. My brother just committed suicide on alcohol and drugs, and I'm coming out there to bury him. And I'm sober 4 years, and I don't understand. And she said, give me the flight number, just flight number, what time you're arriving, blah, 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 real business-like. And I get out there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and there's 4 people from AA waiting on me. I stayed around there for a month at my brother's house, or maybe more, I don't know. I know that along about that time, something on the inside of me began to die, and I didn't understand what it was. My nieces, they were 14, 13, and 6, I think. One of my nieces, she hated my brother very much because he was the way he was. Because she walked into the bedroom 3 or 4 times and saw him trying to kill herself and called for help. Nobody ever called Alcoholics Anonymous. That amazes me that somebody would watch somebody die as a result of alcohol or drugs and not call AA. I don't, they call a psychiatrist. I don't understand that, but that's neither here nor there now. She hated him very much, and she didn't like me too well. I flew out there a few years before, and I made my amends, and I cleared away the wreckage and the garbage of the past. But some people, it takes a while for them to be okay. We make the amends, and we clear away the wreckage and the garbage of the past so that we'll feel okay on the inside. I think that's what Sherry was trying to tell us last night, that we've got to be okay in here or outside. It don't matter. Nothing around us matters. It doesn't matter if we got a big business and a nice car and a pretty wife and a lot of other things. If we're not okay on the inside, then all that's going. All that's going pretty soon, and we're going to die from this illness when we go back out there. We're going to die mentally, or we're going to die physically, or we're going to die spiritually. But we're going to die from alcoholism if we continue to drink it. One of my nieces asked me if I might tell her about this God that I found in Alcoholics Anonymous, and there was the one that was the middle one, and we went up and we sat out on the balcony of the house, and we sat down there and we drank a cup of coffee, and we smoked a cigarette together, and I said, well, I don't know, Vicky. You know how I used to be all the time. I was always drunk, and I was always raising hell and breaking stuff up around the house, and I was always trying to give somebody else a little hurt and pain that I had. Well, I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to try to make somebody else hurt or feel bad so that I'll feel okay. That I don't have to drink today. I can just be me. I can tell you if I feel good, or I can tell you if I feel bad. I can tell you I understand or I don't understand. I can tell you that it's going to be okay. That we don't have to understand everything that God does in our lifetime. God is making me what I am today. Today I'm sober, Vicky. Today I don't drink. Today I don't slap you around anymore. Today I don't steal from your piggy bank. Today I don't steal from your daddy. Today I don't slap your mama around and your brother ain't here. I don't know, Vicky. And the other niece, she came up, and my brother was he was a real wizard with everything, but his real cream of the crop deal was cars. He could really do the number with cars, and he had several actors and entertainers buy numerous cars from him, and my little niece, she came up, and she sat and drank some coffee, but she passed on a cigarette. She said, Uncle Chuck, do you think maybe that God's going in the car business and needs a little help? I'm going to tell you something. I don't understand God all the time, and I'd had a hell of a time trying to explain something to a 6-year-old that somebody 35 years old don't understand. And I said, Vicky, Lisa, I think you understand. I think you understand exactly how it works. This gal that I've been married to, being a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous and wanting to help, she flew out there to be at my brother's funeral. And because of the type of death it was, they had to have a closed casket funeral. She flew out there, and for 1 month that she was there, we didn't say a word. And then 6 or 7 weeks later, I came back, and on the airplane, I told her that I didn't know exactly what had died on the inside, but something had. And there was going to be some new things in my life, but I really didn't know what they were going to be. And it was real strange and real confusing to be sober and be so confused. Well, I came home, and I went back into the hospital, and I was in the hospital 6.5 months, and they found out that I had a bone disease while I was in there, and they felt like they could arrest it for a little while, and basically I just have to get out of there, and I'd have to pick up the pieces and go ahead. You know, the guy that walks around looking down all the time, he doesn't go anywhere. You know, I'd have to hang my head up high and say, you know, today I'm a sober member, and that's a good deal. So I came out of there, and I started putting my AA life back together. When I came out of the hospital, I didn't have a job, I didn't have a house, I didn't have a car, I didn't have anything. I had crutches and braces on my back and braces on my legs and a pocket full of medication to make everything okay. A guy came up to me in front of the hospital and he said, my name is Bob and I'm an alcoholic, and you got time to talk to me? I said, where do you live? You know, the guy had a place. And so I went to spend a few days with him and talked to him about his drinking. You know, I found out that as long as I'm willing to take that first step, whether it be from there to here, or from there to get that desire chip for the first time, once I take the first step, the distance gets shorter every day. Every day the distance is a little bit shorter that I got to go to get there. December of that year, Christmas Day, I buried my dad drunk. I accepted my father as a sick, suffering alcoholic. I buried him, and I was okay with that. I spent that year trying to deal with the grief of my brother and the fact that I didn't work for the whole year of 1979. But I survived, but I had everything I needed. I never ran out of coffee, and I never ran out of cigarettes, and there was always a meeting to go to somewhere, and there was always a sandwich or a piece of cake there to nibble on, and, you know, I never ran out of anything that year. I went to see a psychiatrist that was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he told me some good things, and he told me some crap. He told me that by my brother having a closed casket funeral that I was prolonging the grieving period, that I wasn't able to handle it as I might, and that I was going to have to find a way to do that. And he said, if you don't find a way to do that, then you're not going to be okay. You know, you love somebody that's gone, but they're not forgotten, but they're gone for right now. And you're going to have to learn to do that. And he said, what I'm going to do to help you is I'm going to give you this real good prescription here for sleeping pills and antidepressants. And I said, how long have you been sober, partner? But I'm a real smart ass whenever somebody gives me the chance to be. And he said, well, I had just had my 1-year birthday. I said, well, I think that's great. But you know, I'm so sick that, as I understand it, if I'm not drinking alcohol, but I'm taking pills, then the brain doesn't function like it's supposed to. Then I don't have the feeling when I go through a situation or when I sit down and talk to somebody and I'm peeled up. I don't understand. I don't get the real feeling of loving, of caring, of sharing, of growing in AA. I miss it. Now, you take the pill. You know, I don't need the pill. You take it. I wanted to take them. Oh, you know, it was a bunch. I wanted to take them bad. But I know I couldn't do it. Just one. If I just took one, boy, gone, you know. And I didn't know how I was going to make it, but I was all right. In 1980, I was hospitalized for 3 more months, and I got out, and I was out about a week, and I went back in for 3 more months, and I came out, and the company that I had worked for gave me my job back and paid all of my back pay for the time that I was off sick and paid all of my hospital bills. They paid him because some guy said, you know, if we're going to look at this guy, let's look at 4 years of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know. Now, if I'd have run out there shouting, I'm an AA member, hey, you know, what the hell, wouldn't nothing happen. I just left it alone because there wasn't anything that I could do about it. You know, except the things that you can't change. I can't change a corporation. And they put me back to work. J. Bennett Johnson, who's something down there in Louisiana, called me about my dishonorable discharge, and they saw fit to upgrade my discharge in 1981. And he called me and said it had been upgraded, and I said, geez, that's great. Well, the first time he called me, I didn't know who the hell he was. I thought he was out of town AA member, you know. So they wanted to call me to talk. He said, this is J. Bennett Johnson. I said, well, how you doing, man? What can I do for you? Well, I just wanted to talk to you. I said, well, what group you in? He said, what do you mean, what group? What AA group? He said, well, I'm up here in Washington, D.C. right now, partner. And he told me who he was, what the deal was. Anyway, long story short, they upgraded it 3 times. First time they upgraded, they called me, and, that's great, you know. What benefits I got? Oh, well, you didn't get any, but they just upgraded. And I said, well, okay. They called me again. They said, we upgraded that thing again. I said, man, that's great. What benefits do I got? Oh, you don't have any. I said, all right. Well, he called me again. He said, man, we have upgraded your discharge. We got a doctor's opinion of you. And he says, I think the word was sociopath or sociopathic personality. And he said it down at the bottom. They explained what that meant because you probably wouldn't know. And it said, does not mix well with people when drinking. You know, that's AA. You know, that's everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't mix for crap when we're drinking. And he said, anyway, we upgraded your discharge to an honorable discharge under honorable conditions based upon the fact that you're now sober 8 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, and somebody who was a member of AA wrote us a letter about you. And he said they chose to remain anonymous. So we're going to upgrade this thing, and you're going to have 100% benefits. Well, instantly, college, you know. I'll be a lawyer. Now, I don't know how to add, divide, multiply. I don't know nothing about English. Don't know where commas and periods go and capitals and all of that. Don't know, but I'm going to be a lawyer. So I decide, you know, to go down here and sign up with all these schools. And then I find out the guy says, what do you really want to be? And I say, well, I like to be a chief of some kind, you know. Well, I filled out them forms, and they sent me a little letter. They said, you have 100% benefits. The only problem is it's been 10 years since you got out of the Army, so it's all expired. You know what I mean? So you don't get anything out of it. Well, I think I did get something out of it. You know, I don't think today I even understand exactly what I got out of that little situation, but I got something out of it. Today I understand more about my brother's death. It hadn't been too long ago that somebody else suffering from this disease of alcoholism and other drugs had to die. Now, I'm not saying I understand why that 18-year-old boy had to die, because I don't. But I know that some of us die out there so some of us can live. I know some of us are dying in here. I heard a lady at a convention a while back. I was at this convention, and I'd been up all night watching TV after the meetings, and I was sleeping Sunday morning right in the meeting, right in the front row, you know. And this gal said, you know, what amazes me about 12-step work is that most people in AA assume that 12-step work is to be done on somebody not yet sober. Oh, and I perked right up. You know, I said, that son of a gun talking about me, you know, because I was having a few problems out in the marriage. You know, 12-step work, as I understand it, is carrying the message that there is a way to be sober, that there is a freedom from this illness of alcoholism, that there is a freedom from self-will run right, that there is a peace and a happiness, that the promises that they talk about in Alcoholics Anonymous are true, and they do happen. But sometimes, you know, that message needs to be carried to some guy sitting off in the corner by himself. That's sober, but he's not doing so good. You know, sobriety to me is it's a gift from God. When I came here to my first meeting in 1964, I had no dream or no goal about being sober. When I came here in 73, I thought I might stay sober forever. When I came back in 1974, the first time in 74, I thought I'd go for a year. When I came back on August 24th, 1974, brother, I wasn't looking for a girlfriend, a job, a car, a clothes, or nothing. I was looking for sobriety. One day, brother. Give me one day. You know, if I could make one day today, it would be okay. As I got into some more of those steps, one of the fellows that I chose to do a fifth step with was a guy named Bill. And I know that this isn't true, but this is the first time that I remember it. Bill was the first guy. I was sober 5 years, and Bill D. was the first guy that I remember putting his arm around me and telling me he loved me. Now, I want to tell you something. I got thinking strange things when he did that about him. He had me hemmed up between a mobile home and a big old pine tree, and about 6'6", I guess, or 6'7". He had that arm around me. He said, boy, I just love you. Get back, Bill. And he said, but I'm going to tell you why I love you, and he did. Now, I know somebody told me that before then. That day that he told me that, I didn't know. I'd been over there to a meeting. I was kind of down and kind of out, and I got in the car, and I just went along with you to a meeting to hear somebody say something. And on the way back, I was going to go back, and no intention of drinking, but I'm tired. God, it's been a long haul, The road gets longer and longer and longer, longer and longer, but I could shorten the distance if I did something, but what do? And he told me that he loved me just the way I was. He said, I love you with all of your good points, and I love you with all of your bad points. He said, I like you as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, not for what you could be if you chose to be, but for what you are right now. And I was going to go home. That was on a Sunday. And I was going to go home, and I decided I'd stay. And I stayed over there a week. Just stayed. And after a week, I came home, and I knew right then and there that I could be as successful in Alcoholics Anonymous as I chose to be. I started reading that big book again, and God, I found some stuff in that thing, and I've been reading it for years, off and on. I found things in there that talks about your job, talks about your ability to move up in the business world, in the job. It talks about medication for those of you that, don't drink, that are sober, successful members of AA, that are real bad on medication. It talks about that in there. It talks about relationships with women in there. It talks about relationships with men. Tells you how to sponsor people. And I was running around 5-6 years sober sponsoring everybody. And I found out I was doing it all wrong, Found out that some of the approaches that I had to sponsoring people wasn't even right. But I found out it worked, and the reason it worked was I got them through the first 30 days, and then they got somebody else, and it was okay. I found out that big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, for me, and I'm not getting off into anybody else, but for me, any question that I might have, the answer lies between the covers of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The only hard part is I've never yet found a successful member of AA that would tell me what page it's on. He'd tell me, go home and read the book. You got to read the book. The program says that I must undergo a psychic change. I like the word personality change a lot better. Psychic gets a little crazy with me sometimes, that word. And I went through some of them psychic changes. It says I must undergo a profound personality change, as it says in some of the other chapters other than chapter 5. And I was real loud my first few years in AA. I mean, real loud, I'm talking about arrogant loud. And I told a guy one time that I thought was pretty loud, too. I said, why am I that loud? He said, because you're so scared. Because, you really know that you got 6 years of sobriety, but one day it ain't going to work anymore. You know that one day, this thing that you got on the outside that you let everybody see, and the thing that you take home with you at night that you feel, one day they're just not going to work anymore. That's why you're so loud, because you're so scared. In a sense, you're asking somebody to help you. And he said, I'm going to help you. Why don't you just shut up? Why don't you just not be so damn loud anymore? Why don't you find somebody on God's green earth that you're willing to tell them just how you feel? And I started looking around for people. I looked at some of the oldest people I wanted to tell something to. I had something I wanted to tell somebody about women, how I felt about women, because, boy, I had a hell of a time with them gals. Before I got here and after I got here. Today I got it under control. I found somebody I could tell how I felt about that. I found that the people in Alcoholics Anonymous who really care about me and who care about the other people in AA are the people who, when you sit down and you tell them exactly how you feel, their opinion of you doesn't change. They love you just the same. I think we're all here for the same reason. And I think that we're all basically looking for the same thing. I think some of us take shorter roads to it than others. I know a guy from Shreveport that's been sober a little while, and a good while. Don't want to say how long, don't want to swell his head up. That guy, in my opinion, has straight to it. Here's the problem, and the shortest distance is right there. Straight to it, boy, just cut blood and guts and get to it. And I said, boy, here's the problem, but God, let me go by War Edge, in Detroit to get there. God, let me go the long way. if there isn't anything else that I know today, I know how to stay sober through any kind of situation. Now, whether I continue to do it or not may vary. But I know how to stay sober if people die. I know how to stay sober if people fire me on jobs. I know how to stay sober when the man walks up to my house and knocks on the door and tells me the thing that's pumping my ego up, that brand new Trans Am sitting out there. He said, "Give me the keys, boy. You ain't paying the payment." You know, I knew how to stay sober through that when I was going through that time in '79 when I lost all of that. There was a guy told me, you know, during that time when the car went and the house went and the jobs and the race cars and the fishing boats and all the show cars and everything. He said, "Brother, boy, you got something nobody can take." I said, "What do I got nobody can take?" He said, "You got your sobriety." You got your sobriety, and it's a gift of God. He said, "I never knew anybody in Alcoholics Anonymous that was not successful with sobriety on the inside that had anything on the outside." I used to think material possessions, boy, pile up enough of that crap, and then one of them is happiness. You know, I always got to have a lot of people around. I found out in 1980 that I could be all alone in my house or in my apartment or going down the road in my car. I could be all alone and not alone. You know, I always thought I had to have somebody there, somebody to do this, somebody to say that. I don't have to have that. I was a guy that I think it was necessary for me to take my illness of alcoholism to the depths of insanity, and by that I mean when I came here in 1974, I had visited both places, State of Mind and the Skid Row, the address and the state of mind. And so when I got here, I really didn't have any questions. I sure didn't have any answers, but I sure didn't have any questions either. I found out that anybody that wants to be sober in Alcoholics Anonymous can. I found out that the limitations in our sobriety and in our lives are limitations that we put on ourselves. You know, I used to go around with these little things where I wanted to be someday in my life and what I wanted to be doing. I remember writing down one time everything that I thought I had to have to be okay with me. I read it the other day, and I'm so glad I didn't have it. You know, God, I couldn't have handled it, and it isn't what I wanted. Somebody said at a meeting one time, they said, you know, God is going to give you everything that you need and some of what you want. But when he gives you everything that you really need, you're going to really find out it's what you wanted all along. I think I bucked this program from a spiritual standpoint as long as I could. I think I had this thing that, you know, God sounds okay at the meetings, you know, and good orderly direction and all of that, but God, I'm not getting down on these little old bony knees and asking him to help me. I can do it on my own. And I think there came that time, as the big book says, that my sobriety is contingent upon my spiritual condition, and I couldn't go another day. And I asked God to help me that day, but I had to ask him for the willingness to change, and the willingness and the open-mindedness and the honesty. And you know, I think when I go to an AA meeting, every time I walk in that door, I want to ask God to help me with honesty and open-mindedness and willingness. And the open-mindedness to what I hear there, the willingness to share there if I'm asked to, and the honesty in what I share with somebody else. Somebody said one time at a meeting that I might be you or I might be the only copy of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous they may see, and I think that's what happened to my brother in '79. You know, I know today that my sobriety is a gift to God, and what I do with it's my gift back to him. And if he's as pleased with a gift as I am, then we're all right. I know that there isn't a day in my life today that I haven't been overpaid for my sobriety. It's like the judge said in 1974. He wanted to lock me up for the rest of my natural life, but today I go where I want to go. I still work at that same job, and I spent a little while, you know, divorced and separated, and you know, having the little relationships here and there that we little sickos have, and I decided that I'd like to have a relationship with somebody a little different. And I kept looking in the same places, you know, for somebody different. Isn't that amazing? And then one day I noticed a little old gal sitting across the aisle from me at work, and I said, you know, she's rather cute. And I asked her out. It took me about 2 or 3 weeks to, you know, build up enough courage to ask her out. You know, I'm sober and I know how AA works, but that's a different ball game. And we'd go to lunch every day and we'd talk about whatever, you know. And I'd just almost get that thing, do you want to go out? And then I couldn't quite get it. So I'd put it off another day and another day. And finally I asked her one day, you want to go out? And she said, yeah. And so we went out to this restaurant. Well, the only place I really knew to take her was Place Picado's. And that's where my sponsor took me for my 1-year birthday, and that's where I take everybody for their 1-year birthday. So, hell, that's where we went. And the lady come by and said, would you like a cocktail? And she said no, she didn't drink. And she said something to the effect that night to me that she had went out one time and spent $30 drinking. Could you believe it? And hell yeah, I could believe it. I believe, $30 in an hour, And went through the little deal about, well, I don't drink either, and I started dating her a little more regular, and if you're the kind of guy I was, you don't want to let it all out right now. You just want to give them a little bit, And so I'd give her a little bit, like fishing, I'd just put a little bait on the hook and see how she handled it, and she'd handle it pretty good. And so I'd say, well, hell, she can handle something a little more serious. I'd dump something else on it next time, And every day at work, we would go to lunch, and I'd just drop some little something while we was walking to lunch, And she either didn't ever listen, or it just wasn't any big deal to her. I don't know, and I don't need to know today. It's all right. But I kept on and kept on and kept on, and there came a day that we were going together pretty strong, and something came up, and it. I'm not going to go into it from up here, but it was damn serious business, and pertaining to another lady, and I broke the news to her about the little situation, and I said, she just sat there, I said, well, you could fall out of the chair. And she said, why? I just have to get up again. And I done fell out of the chair drunk so many times, I never thought about getting up. I always thought about just laying there in that misery. And it didn't seem to be any big deal to her. And so we got through that little situation, and we went off and got married on my 10-year birthday in August of this year. And I never have had too much to do with the Al-Anon program. I just came right on into AA where I belonged. I didn't try that deal. But when she and I got married, my sponsor's wife said, the girl really needs Al-Anon. And, married to me, I agree. She does need it. And so she kind of got active in the Al-Anon program, and this thing of being married, in this program, it's not as easy as it may sound. For some folks, it's been married a number of years, and then they got sober in AA. It might be easy. Relationships with other people is hard. Dealing with the illness of alcoholism is hard to do. With 10 years of sobriety, it's amazing that I can look back and see what I did right and what I did wrong. And I can spend a lot of time thinking about all that. Or I can take the short route to it, and this part it works out real well for me. And that's a number of little things that I do. And one of them is I get up every morning, and she fusses at me every damn morning. Every morning. She gets up at 4:30 and goes in there and fixes her face for about an hour. Probably ain't that long, but it seems like it. And I like to get up when the coffee's ready, and I like to reach over on that stand next to the bed where that coffee cup's sitting, And I like to prop up in that bed, and I just meditate. And that clock is 5 minutes faster than the clock in the kitchen. So I got that extra 5 minutes, you see, because I'm always 5 minutes ahead. And I like to set up straight 5 o'clock in that bed, and I like to sit there and meditate till that clock says 10 after. And every morning she says, get up, you got to get ready to go to work. I said, it's the same time. I'm on the same schedule. It ain't 10 after 5 yet. It's 8 or 9 or whatever it is. Every morning she says, it's a minute later. And every morning it ain't. It's the same old schedule. And I think, for me to do that every morning, it's not a guarantee that I'm going to be sober that day. But it's a guarantee that I'm going to start out on the right foot. I'm going to get out of that bed thinking about sobriety. I'm going to get out of that bed thinking about, sucker, you're lucky, to be sober, let alone to have some other things in your life. And then I'm going to go in there and I'm going to sit down at that table, hang my old head down, smoke a cigarette, and drink some more coffee and read that 24-hour-a-day book, and then go in there and get ready to go to work and come back and read it again because I didn't understand what the hell it was talking about the first time. And then I'm going to go to work, and boy, I tell you what, at work it's a son of a gun because I work with 4 or 5 guys that are religious fanatics. They'll stop work in the middle of the day and read the Bible for an hour, and they'll sing, and then they'll talk about going out and getting drunk tonight at that joint down the street, and they'll talk about all them things that they do. And, on some days I get myself into some of that same thinking, and then other days I don't get into it. You know, I understand, or the way that I see it, that those last 3 steps are the steps that I can take that daily stuff with prayer and meditation and my daily inventory. And there's a lot of days that I come home from work or I come home from a meeting, and I hadn't done everything right that day. Some days I have to take an inventory. Some days I screwed up that day. You know, Alcoholics Anonymous gives us, or gives me, the ability to deal with reality. Before I came here, I was ducking and dodging everybody. Hot check, stolen car, everything. And today, sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, I still have bills. I still have things that I owe on. I still got responsibilities and obligations. But today, I don't have to hang my head from nobody in or out of Alcoholics Anonymous. Today, ain't nobody wanting to take me to jail. Today, I don't have to worry about any of that. Now, I have to work like hell to hang on to it. Alcoholics Anonymous took a little old guy from California with no goals, hopes, dreams, or aspirations, and today he walks on the sunny side of the street when it rains. Thank you very much.